Hi everybody, it's Maria from cardbomb.com. Thanks for stopping by to visit me today. Today's video is a little bit different from some of my normal videos. A lot of times I'll take you through how to make a card from start to finish, or I'll go over a technique and not do a card at all, but just go over a technique and different ways to do it. I am a very beginning Copic colorer. I've only recently gotten my markers, and I'm really experimenting with how to get depth, how to make images pop forward, and today's card is one that I shared a little sneak peek of it on my Instagram, and a lot of people said, we'd love to see a video on how you did this. Luckily, I had turned on my camera just to record it, more for my own benefit so that I could learn and watch how I was doing things and see what I liked and what I didn't like about my own process. And so because I did do that, I'm able to share my process video with you today. I do want to reiterate right from the beginning that I don't know what I'm doing. I'm a very beginning colorer. I am learning how to shade with my Copics. I'm learning what colors to put together. I'm learning how to create highlights and shadows. I'm learning to be braver with using darker colors. And so that's kind of what today's process video is about. I was trying to force myself to use darker colors for shadows that I might not typically use, and I wanted to try and get my images to jump off the front of the card. So I started by using a Tim Holtz stamp set from his Stampers Anonymous collection. The stamp set is called Flower Garden CMS 215, and I selected one of the flowers and stamped it multiple times, masking in between so that they could get a little bit of overlap, and I would have one flower, the one I'm coloring right now, be in the foreground. I also used a couple of the different stems and stamped those in, and I did of course have to use masking as well with those. Now, I selected some yellows and oranges for my flowers, and I also got that dark brown that's over there on the left because, like I said, I'm working on using dark colors to try and create the shadows that will then bring my image forward to make it appear that it's coming off of the page. I started out by using my lightest color, which is a Y00, and I kind of went over all of the petals with that, and then I jumped to my next color, which looks like it's a Y02, and started adding color in where I thought that the shadows would be. I've continued on with the colors, and now you can see that I'm really struggling with that orange color because it was leaking onto my page. At that point, I didn't know that I could simply take the cap off the other side of the marker to balance and equalize the pressure within the marker so that it wouldn't drip onto my page. I've since learned that. So for those of you out there who are also new to Copics and are kind of learning how to color and how these pens work, if your pen is dripping on your paper, if you take off the cap on the other side so that both caps are off, it will help balance the pressure within the pen and you won't get those drips. Little tip that I wasn't aware of. So you'll see as I use that orange marker that I will continually get ink dripping onto my paper. And luckily I was able to deal with it, but hot tip for those of you who are like me and are beginners. I decided that my light source was going to be in the top left corner, and you know, this was just something that I decided to try. I'm not used to doing this. I'm not skilled at doing it, but I felt that was a good place for me to place the light source, so I'm putting my darker colors on the right bottom side of the flowers, and I'm also adding them in where I could see that the flower would pull in or have some depth. So at the base of the conical top of the flower where it meets the petals, it seems to me that that would be a place where there would be a lot more shadows. So I'm just going repeatedly into these leaves and going, oh, it looks like it needs a little more color here. It looks like it needs a little bit more there. This one is underneath or behind, so I'm going to make that one darker. And that's basically what I'm doing. And I realized that a more skilled Copic artist would probably have the foresight to just, you know, one and done. They'd pick up the marker once, get it all in the right places. And that's not me yet. So that is why I keep going back in with the same colors over and over. I realize that I missed something, or something should have or could have been a little bit darker in order to add more depth. And so this is just my process as a newbie to it. So I thought that the brown added a really nice contrast to the red, orange, and yellows that I picked, and I like the way that it adds some depth to my colors. And now I'm going in with the greens and shading in my stems and my leaves. I like the contrast of the leaves, and I tried to leave some highlighty places so that they weren't all one uniform solid color. And I tried to make the leaves that were further in the background a little bit darker. And you can see that it does look like they're a little bit set back. Of course, looks like I'm going back up to my flowers, which now seem like they can have more shade and shadowing. And that is something that I've heard, is just be fearless, take a dark marker, always go a little bit darker than you think you can go, and just go for it. See what happens. It's a piece of paper. You can throw it away if you don't like it, but just be bold, try out new things, and see how it turns out. So I did make a couple of little mistakes. I had a little bit of bleeding outside of the lines. So right here what you're seeing is that I was trying to remove some of those mistakes with my colorless marker. Now I'm going into the background and I'm using some blue, and I'm just going to cover the whole background, and I'm not worrying about making it smooth. This is such a rustic, gosh, it's just a beautiful flower stamp set, but it's really rustic and wild. And so I decided that was how I was going to color my background. I decided I liked this kind of flared, sketchy look, and I wasn't going to mess with it. I got really irritated right here because I stuck my finger in some wet marker and made marks at the bottom left of my card, so you'll see that in a minute when I move my thumb. And I just start light and start adding darker color. I flared it out all the way to the edges of the card, but trying to go a little bit lighter and lighter as I reach the edges of the card. I'm getting darker blues and moving in to the center now, and now I'm trying to erase my mistakes with that C0. It didn't really work, but it doesn't matter because I'm going to go over it with different medium towards the end of the card process. Now I'm using my cool grays to add some shadows below the petals and behind the stems. And this is where I think I start to get more depth in my card, not just on the flowers, but to bring the flowers more to the front of the card. I am fearful of going too dark at first, so I am starting with the C0, which you can see when it's still wet. And as it dries, it really does fade into the background, and it doesn't create a really defined shadow. So I kind of went up in increments of 2. I started with the cool gray C0 and then moved to C2, and I will eventually get up to C4. Right now I'm using the C2, and you're starting to see a little bit more. I decided that I would start flicking my pens along with the lines of the petals just to give, I don't know, a little bit of personality to the background. I had fun doing it. I was just at this point, I was like, I'm experimenting. I don't have a goal. I don't have a game plan. I'm just enjoying what I'm doing. So if you see me doing things that are, this is not how you're supposed to use your markers, or that's not the way, I'm sure you're right. I'm just kind of having fun. So I decided that I liked that flicky look and decided I would even add some to the tops of the flowers, especially because I had my light source in my mind coming from top left. I even added some of that shadow to the top right, because if the light source were lower, you would have some shadows on the right as well, even on the top of the flowers. Now I'm going in a little bit darker. I'm going in with that C4 now, and I'm realizing that it's looking okay to have darker color. I was kind of afraid of starting darker, but step by step, here I go. It's working out. And between that C4 and my flower petals, I'm trying to leave a little bit of space. I'm not going right up to the edge of the flower petals, and I feel like that gives it a little bit of a glow, if you know what I'm talking about. And I'm really deciding at this point that I like I'm just calling it the flicky look. It just adds character to it. It matches the petals. I'm not going petal by petal. It's not exact, but it's the same style as the flower petals are, and I think that it matches well. I decided to add a little bit more shadowing below the leaves and along the sides of the stems. And now you're just really seeing the different colors starting to work well together. Got a little bit braver, and I went in with the C5, and now I'm adding these shadows not just behind below the leaves, but if you saw, I actually added some into the center of the flower there. I did cut a lot of this video out because the truth is that this took an hour for me to do, In no way was I going to let you guys sit bored out of your mind watching this for an hour, so I tried to edit out what you didn't need to be seen and make sure that you could still understand what I did throughout the process. Still just adding more shadows, and feeling like I liked the colors, but here I am. I'm realizing that because I did like that, I was going to go back in and add more, and I was okay to add the darker colors, which is what I tend to be afraid of. I always think I'm going to go too dark and just ruin it. But as I go back and forth, I'm really realizing it's okay. You can go really dark. And as I moved those gray shadows out, I went with my lighter colors and moved them further out. And as I did that, I added some of those cool grays into the flowers as well. And I just kind of started to get reckless at this point. It was just color everywhere, mishmash, get some texture into that background. I apologize because my camera is shaking. My camera sits on my table, and since I was getting reckless, my table was shaking. This is the point where I just started to move more quickly, and I stopped worrying about how it was going to look, and I just started adding the color. And I think this is the point where I started doing my better work. So now I'm adding the brown in to get some more depth. You can see that as I do that, I lose some of the detail from the stamped image, and I really didn't want to lose that detail. So you'll see how I fix that in a minute or two here. I wanted those stems to kind of coordinate with the colors that I had in the flowers, and that brown carried across nicely from the flowers into the stems. Because I'm not skilled with Copics, I didn't get all of the highlighting that I really wanted to have, and so I thought that a white gel pen would nicely add some highlights. I tried to visualize where the light might be hitting the flower petals, where it might be reflecting off those conical tops of the flowers, and that's where I added my accents and my highlights with the gel pen. I really felt like that added a lot to it, but it still didn't feel quite like it was done. It was fun to do. It's neat that you can do little dots and little flicks and trace lines and just add so much to your work with one of these gel pens. I do feel like it took it to the next level in terms of the depth and the highlighting that I wasn't myself able to get just with the Copics. That's just because of my skill level, guys. I'm not saying that you can't get that depth with the Copics. I just can't. So I'm finishing up my little details, and I decide that I'm going to add some of this white gel pen to the background. I started adding some dots and some flicks, more highlights where I think they're needed. You'll notice that I just keep going back. I start doing something and I realize I could have put more. I don't know where to stop. But I certainly decided that I felt like these flowers were kind of glowing into the background, and now I decided I needed highlights in the background as well. So there's no rhyme or reason to what I'm doing. These are not intentionally placed at all. It's just white scribbles in the background, just to kind of give it a little bit of a glow and to carry that texture over into the background as well. I do like the way that turned out. And it looks like I missed a couple of leaves on the bottoms of these flowers. Don't want to miss those. Now, because I had lost some of that detail in the flowers as I colored with the dark browns, I felt like I needed to go back in and add some darkness and add some of the detail back in. So I got a fine-tipped black Sharpie, and I went in and added, just lots of details and some shadowing back in. I tried to color into the areas where I felt like there would be a crease where you wouldn't in real life be able to see the detail. And then I also tried to make it match the original stamp design, made my little pen flicks and my markings angled in such a way that they matched the way that the flower was drawn. I decided that I wanted my stems set back even further, and now that I had added so much extra texture to the background and even to the flowers, I ended up deciding to add more texture to the stems and to the leaves, and I kind of started just scribbling onto them to add some extra detail, extra texture, and drop them further back into the background of my card. I'm really not thinking at this point about what I'm doing. I'm just going for it, and I think that ultimately that was my goal for this card, was to just really start trying to do it without worrying how it was going to be turning out. So I'm adding some darkness below the leaves between the cracks, adding little flicks with these, with this pen as well, and a little bit of detail to the background, just little dots. Now, this is, for me, what the magic maker was. A lot of times I feel like there's a magic maker when you're making a card, and for me it was a distress crayons, the total magic maker. So I've just got this blue Tim Holtz distress crayon. I'm rubbing it on my fingers, and then I'm rubbing it into the background and just smearing it. And these crayons are so cool because you can draw with them. They are opaque. Well, they can be opaque. You can draw them on thickly. So here I am just going straight to paper, and you can see that it goes darker. But then look, with my finger, I can just rub in there and smudge them so that it really just blends in with the background. So I was able to use that same crayon and get depth and shadow and darkness where I wanted it, but I was also able to smudge it around with my finger. I just applied it directly to my finger on the lower part and smudged it around. So I love that I can have the same color but in different tones, just depending on the way that I apply it or how hard that I pressed. And it really smudges easily, and I love that. And you should know that it sets. So once it's set, you're not going to rub your finger across it and start smearing it. I added that below, and I really liked the way that it came out. So in my mind, since I had been thinking that this was all kind of glowing, I decided I would add yellow to the top, and I just applied that distress marker in the same way that I had the blue one, smearing it with my fingers. And this is it, folks. I hope you've enjoyed my process, and thank you for stopping by.